Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I am Catherine Reed from the League of Women Voters, and tonight we are hosting two forums, one with the two candidates for Commonwealth's attorney here in Fairfax County, and our second segment will be three senators whose districts cover Fairfax County. We are pleased to partner with a number of community and service groups in sponsoring this forum. Like the League, our partners are committed to supporting the democratic process by providing opportunities to hear from the candidates and compare their responses and encouraging community participation. We're grateful to the volunteers from Inside Scoop and the staff of Fairfax Public Access for their help in providing this venue. And we thank the many volunteers who've given hours and efforts in organizing this event. We particularly thank all of you for watching tonight. This is what American democracy looks like at its best, an opportunity to examine the issues factually, to ask questions regarding the things most important to us, and to explore the candidates' positions. You may call in questions for the candidates tonight at 571-749-1142, and you will see that on the screen later on. Here is the format. Since the roles and responsibilities of the senators and Commonwealth's attorney differ, we've divided this into two different panels. The candidate forum for the Commonwealth's attorney is first. The two candidates certified to appear on the ballot in November are both here tonight. I will introduce each candidate, who will then have 90 seconds for opening remarks. After the first question, I will rotate the order in which candidates give 60-second answers to your questions. At the conclusion of the question time, each candidate will have 30 seconds to make a closing statement. After the forum, candidates will be given a list of the questions asked and the additional questions submitted. They may post answers to some or all of the questions on their websites. The candidates have all agreed to these rules, so let's get started. The candidate on my left is Jonathan Fahey. The candidate on my right is Steve Descano. This is an open seat for Commonwealth's attorney. There is not an incumbent running. So I will start with Jonathan Fahey on my left for his 90-second opening remarks.
Thank you. I'm a little bit old to be talking about the help my mother gave me, but I want to anyway. When I was in high school, my mother, Helen Fahey, was elected Commonwealth's attorney in Arlington County as a Democrat. When I was in college, she was appointed by President Bill Clinton to be the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. And what I learned from her were a couple of things. One, this job is not about a partisan agenda. It doesn't matter about political affiliation. It's about fidelity to the rule of law and making sure law-abiding citizens are protected. If you find me worthy of your trust, I will bring these lessons to the office of the Commonwealth's attorney. It's sometimes said that our criminal justice system is broken. That may be true in some areas, but it's not true here in Fairfax County. Crime in Fairfax County has dropped dramatically over the last generation, thanks in large part to the work of Ray Morrow, the Commonwealth's attorney, his staff, and the heroic work of our police department and the thoroughly professional work that they do every day. I come to this job with ample experience, being a federal prosecutor and a state prosecutor, serving 17 years at the United States Attorney's Office, earning the John Marshall Award, the highest award in the Department of Justice, awarded by Obama Attorney General Loretta Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Fahey. Mr. Descano.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm so grateful to be here to talk about the Commonwealth's attorney's position, which is the leader of our criminal justice system, and that person should lead with our community values. And as the official Democratic nominee, I've been doing that for years. I'm a West Point graduate, I'm a former U.S. Army officer, and after working my way through law school, I served as a federal prosecutor in the Obama Justice Department. Now I run a small business that helps children with autism. I've also served as a board member of NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia with the NAACP, and I was selected by the Board of Supervisors to be one of the initial 9 members of the Fairfax County Police Civilian Review Panel. And it's those experiences that have caused me to take a hard look at our Commonwealth's attorneys and our criminal justice system in Fairfax. And what I found was a number of outdated and outmoded policies that have failed to serve us as a community. You know, we've only had 2 Commonwealth's attorneys in the last 50 plus years, and the current person in that position was handpicked by his successor. This means that we haven't had a real opportunity to build a criminal justice system that serves us, keeps us safe, aligns with our values, and can meet the challenges of tomorrow in over 50 years. And I've given that challenge a lot of thought. As a matter of fact, I've put it down, written it, a 20-page plan on how we need to reform our system to meet those challenges of tomorrow. It's on my website. I encourage you to read it. And it was that plan and that foresight that earned me the endorsement of all local leaders, the Attorney General Mark Herring, and of course the Washington Post, which marked me as well prepared for this position. I'm Steve Descano, your Democratic nominee, and I know safety is only net possible through justice.
Thank you very much. So we have a lot of questions here, more than we can possibly answer in one evening. But there's been a lot of interest in criminal justice reform. We've heard a lot of it at the federal level. People are interested in how we need to reform our justice system in order to reduce over-incarceration of individuals. So one of the things that someone has asked is to basically flesh out what the role of a Commonwealth's attorney is when we talk about the criminal justice system. What would your role be in efforts to reform the criminal justice system? Explain a little bit about what this job is in your perspective. Microphone, Mr. Fahey.
Thank you. The role of the Commonwealth Attorney is to be the chief law enforcement officer in the county. That is the chief prosecutor. And as the chief prosecutor, the job is to prosecute cases fairly and impartially, and doing so, keeping the community safe. The role of the prosecutor is to always put public safety ahead of politics and never let political influences influence any decisions. Fairfax County has been a leader in innovative criminal justice solutions. That's why we don't have problems like mass incarceration, which is our sheriff, Stacey Kincaid, has repeatedly said, because of these programs that have been innovative, that have given people second chances and alternatives to incarceration, we have the safest county we've had in history while having the lowest incarceration rate in 40 years. Fairfax County is on a terrific track, and we need to keep it on that track. And I have 17 years experience as a federal prosecutor, and I also worked as a state prosecutor, and I have that experience to lead this county.
Thank you, Mr. Fahey. Mr. Descano.
The role of the Commonwealth's attorney is to lead our criminal justice system so that it aligns with our values while at the same time keeping us safe. Because we know that the only true path to safety is through justice. And here are some great examples in where the Commonwealth's attorney can lead. First, cash bail. We know that cash bail doesn't keep us safe. Forcing someone to pay money simply to get out of jail does nothing but penalize poor people for being poor. And it actually is proven to increase crime down the road. That's why we need a Commonwealth's attorney who's going to lead and end cash bail. Another great example is our diversion programs. Things like mental health court, drug court, veterans docket. What we have right now simply is ineffective. We need to reform that system so that it helps people get at the root causes of their problems, the root causes of their addiction, but come out on the other side without the type of criminal record that's going to keep them locked in a cycle of recidivism and future crime. You know, I've spent years traveling around this community, not only as a candidate, but as a member of the Fairfax County Police Civilian Review Panel. I know where the status quo has fallen short, and I know the values of our community, and that's my written plan addresses all those and does so in a way that aligns with our community values.
Thank you. So the next question, I'm going to start back with Mr. Descano before we go to Mr. Fahey. Speaking of these, we have a question here about the current programs that exist in Fairfax County that divert people from jail or prison or from the justice system entirely to keep people in the community instead of being locked up. What are some of those programs that we currently have that you support, and what would be some new programs or different methodology of trying to divert people from incarceration? Mr. Descano.
Thank you. We do have the bones to build on, but we need a strong leadership to actually build them to make them effective. Because what we need to do is we need to help people get at the root causes of their problem, but come out without the type of criminal record that is going to haunt them for the rest of their lives and push them to more crime in the future. End that recidivism cycle. A great example is our Veterans Court docket. I'm a veteran. We have 72,000 veterans in this county. And we have a great opportunity to help these individuals who are struggling with drug addiction and PTSD-related addictions get at the root causes of their problem. But unfortunately, our current Commonwealth's attorney acts as the gatekeeper, and there are less than 10 people in that program right now simply because he won't offer an incentive to get into that program. I'll do more than that. I will serve our veterans and expand that program. Another issue is our drug court. We don't have the type of drug court that we actually need, which is predisposition, one that allows people, if they make it through the program, to not only get their addiction under control, but to come out without a criminal record that's going to haunt them for the rest of their life. That's going to help those people, and it's going to make our community safer by ending the recidivism cycle. That's what we need to do in Fairfax County.
Thank you, Mr. Descano. Mr. Fahey.
Thank you. Yes, we do currently have the mental health docket, we have a veterans docket, and we also have a drug court. We have many programs that are helping people avoid prison, getting second chances, putting their lives back together, and that's a good thing, and that's something we should all work towards, because a lot of the criminal justice system is giving people second chances, sometimes third chances, because we want people to get out of the criminal justice system, to turn their lives around, to become productive citizens, to help other people also stay out of the criminal justice system. As the Commonwealth's attorney, part of the job is certainly these diversion programs, but some of the job is also dealing with the most serious crimes in the county, the murders, the robberies, cases like that. And these are the types of cases I've done as a federal prosecutor, a state prosecutor. And in this job, experience matters how you do this job. My opponent's experience has been limited to tax cases. So when trying to accomplish the goals of rehabilitation, it's also important to make sure the core mission of the office is also done. Thank you.
Okay, so the next question we have is about prosecuting misdemeanor charges instead of felony charges in cases where the theft of property does not exceed $1,500. And this is a case where we probably need to let viewers know that Virginia has one of the lowest thresholds for felony charges based on the value of property taken. And that was increased from $250 to $500, but that still means that somebody who is 20 years old can be convicted on the charge of stealing high-priced tennis shoes. So talk a little bit about your perspective on and how you would approach some of these property thefts, crimes, destruction, depending on the value.
Well, that's a good question, and I think one of the things that's important to understand is the Commonwealth's attorney's job is not to make the law. That's the role of the state legislature, and the state legislature has regularly been debating this issue, and they've decided the appropriate level is $500. That does not mean in every case a prosecutor should seek a felony for $500 or more. You look at each case individually. You look at aggravating factors, you look at mitigating factors, and then make a decision. But what my opponent and I differ greatly on is my opponent believes that as a prosecutor, the role of the Commonwealth's attorney can set the limit as to whatever they want the felony limit to be. So this means somebody could come into Fairfax County and steal $1,400 every single day, and they'll never get charged with the felony. That's not good for business. That's not good for the community. That's not the way the law should be applied. It should be applied fairly and impartially, but the Commonwealth's attorney does not make the law.
Mr. Descano.
You know, I disagree with my opponent because I think this job is about leadership. It's not simply a ministerial job to just quote unquote push paper around. It's to lead and lead in the way that keeps our community safe and does so in a way that accords with our values. And this is a great example on where I'm going to be a leader and my opponent is afraid to lead. We know that the felony larceny threshold of $500 is way too low. Studies show that even at a much higher level, crime doesn't increase. Even at $1,500, crime doesn't increase. But what we can do, and what I am prepared to do, is take that and treat that as the threshold between a felony and a misdemeanor, because that's not letting people get off easy. Misdemeanors are still available to hold people accountable for their crimes. But what it does is it allows people to get more access to diversion treatment because they're charged with a misdemeanor. It also keeps them from having the type of criminal record that's going to lock them into a cycle of decreased opportunity, increased poverty, and increased crime. The Commonwealth's attorney position demands leadership. This is an area where I will lead to help our community, build our community up, and keep our community safe, not simply look at this as a ministerial job like my opponent does.
Okay, so we have a follow-up question related to that. Are you willing not to charge misdemeanors such as trespassing or loitering, which are associated with poverty, mental illness, and homelessness? This viewer wants to know.
Well, I think what's important to know is that as the Commonwealth's attorney, what we need to do as an office is to take every case and make sure that what we are doing is we're not penalizing people simply for being poor, and that we are taking a look at an eye towards keeping our community safe, but building up our community. Because when we continually criminalize poverty in the way that we do with things like cash bail and some of these other petty crimes that are charged, what we do is we further victimize people and push them into a cycle of decreased opportunity, increased poverty, and more crime. That's not what we need to do to keep us safe. On a case-by-case basis, sure, we need to look at every factor, and I'm not prepared to say exactly what I'll do on every single case, but at the end of the day, my values are to build up our community, keep us safe, and not penalize poor people simply for being poor. That's the job of the Commonwealth's attorney.
Mr. Fahey.
I was trained as an assistant Commonwealth's attorney under the leadership of Bob Horan and Ray Morrow, both Democrats, and both have endorsed my candidacy. And what they trained us, the first role of the prosecutor is to be fair. That means fair to every defendant. That means fair to witnesses. That means fair to victims too. And that's what we would do under my leadership at the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, because again, this job is about leadership. And the Commonwealth's Attorney is the top law enforcement officer in the county. Somebody that should be able to take on the most serious cases entering the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. I know there are a lot of questions about marijuana and petty theft and things like that, but the Commonwealth's Attorney also has to be able to try cases like the DC sniper case that Ray Morrow and Bob Horan tried. Somebody that could step in on day one and do that. I have that experience. My opponent does not have that experience. On day one, he could not handle the least serious case in the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, let alone the most serious case. And for an office to look to him for leadership, he will be lacking in every respect. And that's what's most critically important about this job.
Thank you, Mr. Fahey. So the next question is the plus and minuses of modifying, doing away with the cash bail system. Some places have done that. I think New Orleans has done away with cash bail. What do you see are the pluses or minuses of doing something about cash bail?
Again, just a little bit of background on the cash bail. Cash bail is set by a judge. It's not set by the prosecutor. But the role of bail is to essentially assure the defendant will come back to court. But the role of the prosecutor in the bail process is to look at two factors. One, the safety of the community, and two, what can make sure the defendant comes back to court. And the prosecutor should look for the least restrictive means to ensure both of those factors. And sometimes it could be a personal recognizance bond, sometimes it could be something else. But the role of the prosecutor should be ensuring people come to court and the community is kept safe. And nobody should be penalized for being poor. Bail should not be punitive in any respect, and I would never seek or allow my office to seek a punitive bail. It's safety of the community and risk of non-appearance in court would be the two factors that would drive our decisions. Thank you.
Mr. Fahey. Mr. Toscano.
I think it's very interesting that my opponent in his answer noticed that there's a problem, but refuses to show leadership to actually address it. The fix on this issue is very simple. We need to get rid of cash bail. Because the way it works is we have a robust pretrial services in Fairfax County. When you're arrested, what happens is pretrial services gives you an objective test, and if you are deemed to be a risk, you are either deemed to be a risk to the community or to not be a risk to the community. And because safety is paramount, what we need to do as the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office is take a position that if you are a risk to the community, we're going to ask that you stay in jail until your trial. But if you are not a risk to the community, we're not going to seek cash bail. We're going to ask that you be gone on personal recognizance or some type of supervision. The reason we do this is because we can't penalize poor people for being poor. Not only is it wrong, but it actually decreases community safety. Because if you think about it, somebody's locked in jail because they can't pay, they're going to lose their job, they're going to lose their house, and they might lose their kids in a matter of a few days. That's going to push them and their families into this cycle of increased poverty, decreased opportunity, and increased crime. We need to take the leadership to stop that.
Thank you. So the next question, we've had a couple of them dealing with your position on the death penalty. Are there circumstances under which you would seek the death penalty, Mr. Toscano?
We need to ask whether the death penalty keeps us safe and does it reflect our values. And the answer to both of those questions is it does not. It doesn't keep us safe because it doesn't deter, no one is deterred from committing a crime because of a punishment someone else got. And we don't need to rely on the death penalty to keep a dangerous person away from our community. Life without parole sentences are effective to do that. Not only that, but it's a waste of resources. Our death penalty cases take a lot of resources to try and to defend, and they do that for years. Those are resources we should be putting towards our community, things that actually do keep us safe. And the death penalty is also racially discriminatory. We know that the leading indicator of whether someone gets the death penalty is the race of the victim and the race of the perpetrator. The death penalty doesn't do anything to keep us safe. It doesn't accord with our values. All the death penalty does is used by prosecutors to appear tough on crime to their constituents. That's not what we need in Fairfax County. We need a leader who is thoughtful, who's going to take a smart on crime approach.
Thank you, Mr. Toscano. Mr. Fahey.
I've prosecuted one death penalty case as a federal prosecutor. The defendant in that case murdered 2 children, an 8 and 9-year-old, stabbed them to death on Mother's Day. He also killed a service member in Arlington and also attacked 3 other women in Arlington. He, when incarcerated, threatened to kill correctional officers, made keys to get out of his handcuffs, and made a shank. As the Commonwealth's attorney, death penalty should only be reserved for the most serious case, the most heinous cases, the most serious defendants. And you should look at what we did at the Department of Justice. And the case I just mentioned was a case that Loretta Lynch awarded me the John Marshall Award for, and Eric Holder, Attorney General Eric Holder, approved the seeking of the death penalty in that case. But we should look at aggravating factors about the defendant, aggravating factors about the crime, and then we should look at mitigating factors about the defendant and the crime. And we should never take the decision lightly, but when appropriate, we should not be afraid to seek, because that's what the Virginia legislature has authorized. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fahey. So there's a number of questions here about marijuana. This is, starting back with Mr. Fahey, about how you deal with questions of possession of marijuana for individual use, your perspective on, and you have made clear that the legislature sets the law, but there is a question about decriminalization of marijuana versus legalization of marijuana versus the fact that in some states outside Virginia, like in DC, it's legal. So what is your perspective on pursuing possession cases here in Virginia?
Thank you. That's a good question. I expected that we would get some of that. This is a very good opportunity in Virginia, with a lot of states have legalized marijuana. The District of Columbia has as well. This is a good opportunity for us to study it and decide and determine whether or not it's working, meaning are there more fatalities from car accidents? Is there more substance abuse disorder resulting from it? We should study this, study how these other states are doing, and if they're having additional problems or if they're not having problems at all. Those should be factored in to our legislators' decision as to whether or not to decriminalize marijuana, to legalize it. But as a role of prosecutor, we don't have that right to just decide a law that we don't like or that we think is politically popular or trending a certain way to make something legal. However, in Virginia, we don't prosecute marijuana cases very severely. Jail is never sought for marijuana cases. I would not seek jail for possession of marijuana cases. Defendants are offered an opportunity to get a 251 disposition, which their crime gets dismissed if they complete certain programs. And I think that's appropriate until further studies or further actions of the legislature.
Thank you, Mr. Fahey. Mr. Descano.
The Commonwealth's attorney needs to look at this and ask, how are we going to keep our community safe today and in the future? It's clear that simple possession of marijuana, and we're not talking about driving under the influence or drug dealing, but simple possession of marijuana simply is not a safety risk. And someone who goes through this current process, the 251 program my opponent mentioned, those are somebody who is going to get a record, even if they complete the program, that they can never expunge. That record is going to follow them around every time they go rent an apartment, try to get an education loan, and try to get a job. And that's going to push them into a cycle of decreased opportunity, increased poverty, and the possibility of increased crime down the road, making us less safe. That's why I am not going to prosecute simple possession of marijuana cases. And I will tell you, this is not a novel approach. Even in Virginia, there are Commonwealth attorneys all around the state who have already taken this step. And the chief law enforcement officer of our state, Attorney General Mark Herring, he agrees with my position on this, and that's why he endorsed me in this race, to be a leader on this issue in Fairfax County.
Thank you. So, next question has to do with establishing a system for collecting and reporting data in your office that captures information on demographics, charging and bail recommendations, diversion, case processing, plea negotiations, and sentencing recommendations. I think what people are trying to get at is the disparities that we appear to have in who gets incarcerated. The other question I would ask is how many of some of these felony convictions are being committed before someone's 25 years old? And that's just my personal perspective. If somebody commits an act that results in having a felony record, how many of those people are actually under the age of 25? So are you committed? What are your thoughts on trying to do data collection and furthermore data analysis on how the criminal justice system is treating people in our community?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you got so many questions about it because it's one of the things that I talk about very in depth in my plan. It's actually a pillar of the reforms I plan to bring to our criminal justice system, because we do have disparities. We see them, but the only way that we are going to be able to root out and fix systemic disparities is by taking a systemic approach, and that means data collection. And I plan to collect data. I plan to invite outside independent organizations to come in and collect the data for us. And not only that, I'm going to put that data out to the public so that the public can see it and see what we're working on. And that data is going to be cross-referenced by race, economics, where people live, and of course we will deal with the issues that you mentioned, Catherine. This data is going to be comprehensive, and we're going to use it to figure out the plans that we focus like a laser on rooting out the disparities, because that's my promise. Not only am I going to keep our community safe, but I'm going to do it in a way that treats everybody fairly, regardless of who they are, where they live, or the color of their skin. And the first step in making sure we do that is to get that data, and I will get that data.
Thank you, Mr. Toscano. Mr. Fahey.
Thank you. The role of the Commonwealth's attorney and everyone in the Commonwealth's attorney's office is to treat everyone fairly, regardless of race, sex, sexual orientation, or anything else, to treat everyone fairly. This idea that our prosecutors now are not doing so, or that the police officers are not doing so, I don't think that is the case. The Commonwealth's attorney is the lead law enforcement officer in the county. This idea that we would have outside organizations come in to do an audit of the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, and my opponent, I think he didn't mention, but I think these are probably the same outside organizations that funded his primary campaign, where he got $500,000 from these organizations to install him as a Democratic nominee. But the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office treats people fairly and will continue to treat people fairly when I'm the Commonwealth's attorney, and we will make sure we're treating people fairly, and we have to look at data that we see that we are not treating fairly. We will adjust and make sure that we are doing that. Thank you.
All right, so we are going to start now with our 30-second closing statements. Mr. Fahey, we will start with you for your 30-second closing phase.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I grew up in this county. I'm raising my 3 kids here. I want to keep this county safe. We have the safest large community in America, and it's because of a great Commonwealth's attorney, and it's because of a great police department. I want to work with them to keep our community safe and to keep our public safety first and politics out of the courtroom. Thank you for being here, or thank you for having me here. Go Nats.
Thank you. Mr. Toscano.
You've heard a lot today, including lies, personal attacks, and fear-mongering by my opponent, which is straight out of his Republican playbook. What you need to remember is there's a clear difference in values and vision between me and him. As a Democratic nominee, I bring Democratic values, and they are very different from the values my opponent brings as the officially endorsed Republican candidate. And you can see his values in action when he took a political job with the Donald Trump administration. You can see them when he took and accepted the endorsement of the Fairfax County Republican Party. On November 5th, vote your values. Vote for safety and justice. Vote for leadership to meet the challenges of tomorrow. Thank you.
All right. That concludes our Commonwealth's Attorney Forum. I would like to thank our timers, Mary Valder and Bree Driscoll, and screeners, Rona Ackerman and Tyler Kim. So please join us after this break. We are going to have 3 candidates for Senate joining us here on Inside Scoop.
Operation Wonder Park is a go!
There's nothing more powerful than imagination.
Honey, have you seen my cell phone?
But don't just imagine.
My park came to life?
Ooh, a plot twist!
Use STEM to build, create,
She did it!
and change the world.
Who's with me?
I'm more of a 2 feet on the ground kind of guy.
It's gonna hurt tomorrow.
If she can STEM, so can you. Find out more at She Can STEM.
So, I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that. That's disgusting. Oh, poop already. You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. We are hosting 3 senatorial candidates here tonight. I will remind everyone that all the candidates certified to appear on the November ballot were invited to participate. For scheduling reasons and other reasons, we have 3 here tonight. Their districts all include Fairfax County. The same rules apply as applied to our previous panel. Each candidate will have 90 seconds for their opening remarks. They will have 1 minute to answer the questions. They will have 30 seconds for their closing statements. So we will get started. I will introduce my first candidate here on the left, which is Senator Jennifer Boysko of the 33rd Senate District. Your opening remarks.
Thank you so much for having me. I am Senator Jennifer Boysko. It is my pleasure to be here with you all. I represent Herndon, the town of Herndon, the town of Leesburg, Dulles Airport, Ashburn, Sterling, and parts of Chantilly. I have been serving since January of this year, where I won a special election. Prior to that, I served in the House of Delegates representing the 86th District. My focus is on education, an economy that works for everyone, and making sure that our transportation system works. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And to my immediate right, we have candidate Arthur G. Purvis. Mr. Purvis, your opening remarks.
Thank you, League of Women Voters and Inside Scoop, for inviting us. Like my opponent, this is my 8th race, with a slight difference that she won her 7 previous races. But in my previous races, I so admired the League for putting on these forums that I became a League member. I'd like to acknowledge my opponent, who is absent because she's dealing with a injured ankle and heart surgery issues that my wife, who died 2 months ago, also dealt with, but less successfully. Senator Howell sent me a condolence card, which I greatly appreciate, and I wish her a speedy and full recovery. I'm running to end racial inequality in Virginia public schools by bringing back phonics, arithmetic drill, history, and the 10 Commandments, rather than tax hikes, busing, boundary changes, and police. The racial inequality evident in our high school seniors actually surfaces in the 4th grade reading and math tests, because a century ago, our public schools adopted John Dewey's progressive education, which replaced phonics with whole word, which has created 14 million dyslexics. Said arithmetic drill is evil, which created a STEM crisis, crowded out history with social studies, which is giving us a crop of socialists, and replaced the Lord's Prayer with secularism, which has resulted in school violence. The legacy of John Dewey is decades of racial inequality. The Virginia General Assembly controls public schools, and that's why I want to be elected to serve there and be part of the fix. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Purvis. Senator George Barker from the 39th Senate District.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for having me, and for the League of Women Voters for putting on this forum tonight. It's a little odd here with the 3 of us being candidates, but none of us running against each other. So we all have opponents, but our opponents are not here this evening. So I will talk a little bit about some of the things I've been working on and answer questions about that, and also talk about some of the things I think that we can achieve in Virginia. I have been a state senator representing about half of Mount Vernon, half of Lee District, and half of the Springfield District, and 1 small precinct in Sully District in Fairfax County. And I'm thrilled to be able to represent the people of the 39th District. I love my job. It doesn't pay a whole lot, but it has a lot of rewards in terms of what we can accomplish. One of the things that I love about being in the Senate of Virginia is that we actually work together across party lines to get things done. And we get things done on time, and we get things done in a reasonable manner. And I think that we have a legacy in which we can build moving forward. Right now, we're in a situation where the Republicans have been in control in the state Senate, 21-19, and had a slight majority in the House as well. That may well change next year, but I can guarantee you that we will work with each other to get things done. And I look forward to working with whoever's elected from whatever other districts at this time. Thank you very much, and we'll take questions and whatever comes forward on things.
Thank you, Senator Barker. So we'll start the first question with Senator Boysko. So today was a very momentous occasion. They unveiled 7 statues on the grounds of the Capitol in Richmond, honoring women in Virginia's history. Imagine that. Up to this point, it's just been Pocahontas. So it's kind of, it's a moment. But a lot of people have a question about what's going to happen with the ERA amendment in the 2020 legislative session. Now, the Senate actually did pass out the ERA amendment. The hang-up has been in the House. We're asking you to look into your crystal ball and say what you can do and what the Senate can do to get this to a floor vote in both chambers.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I wanted to say that the very first vote that I got to take in the Senate this past year was for the Equal Rights Amendment, and it was really special. And as you said, it did pass out of the Senate on a bipartisan vote, and went over to the House where they couldn't get even a full vote on the floor for it. We believe that there is a good chance that the Democrats are going to take control of the House of Delegates this next year. I think that there's a very good opportunity for that, and if that happens, I believe we will get the ERA passed in a very timely manner. I think it's going to be a high priority for many of us, and I'm looking forward to being part of that again.
Thank you, Senator Boysko. Mr. Purvis, the ERA amendment.
I noticed Senator Boysko did not give a reason for passing the ERA. The 1964 Civil Rights Act already mandated equal pay for equal work. I don't know how many times you have to make something illegal before you think it can be enforced. Also, the Equal Rights Amendment, it's worded so that it only applies to government. It's advertised as mandating equal pay for equal work in private businesses, but it does not affect private businesses. But what will happen is that in state universities, you'll have a field day of lawsuits where they'll challenge every personnel decision as being based on discrimination on gender. It's a gift to trial lawyers.
Thank you, Mr. Purvis. Senator Barker.
Thank you very much for that particular question. I'm proud to say that I was the first legislator to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed in a Southern Republican-controlled legislative body several years ago when I got that passed in the Senate of Virginia. That was at a time when the Republicans controlled the Senate, but we, on a bipartisan basis, as Senator Boysko referred to in terms of how we acted this year, it passed 24-15 when I brought that up. And I worked closely with a lot of my Republican colleagues to bring several of them along, and it actually, at one point or another, 6 or 8 of them did support the action that we were taking. It's something that I think is overdue. It's something that is necessary now. My wife has been extraordinarily closely involved with the League of Women Voters and others in moving forward on the women's suffrage memorial down at the Occoquan Regional Park in Fairfax County, and I look forward to making sure that she has all the rights and privileges that I have.
Thank you, Senator Barker. The next question that we have is, and we will start with Mr. Purvis, what gun violence prevention measures do you support or oppose, and what would you do in the Senate in the 2020 legislative session about gun violence prevention?
Well, if my colleagues here had been at the Battle of Lexington and Concord, the first battle of the Revolutionary War, they would have fought on the side of the British, because that was a gun control raid. The British were trying to disarm the colonists by seizing their gunpowder at Concord so they could not arm themselves against tyranny. I think that founding fathers thought that was pretty important, and that's why the right to own guns is the Second Amendment and not, say, the Eighth Amendment. We've had the Second Amendment since 1791. We've had this random gun violence in the last few decades. What caused it? Breakdown of the family, single-parent homes. The fact that a major cause is the failure of our public schools to teach reading to low-income children, so they end up being in crime-ridden areas. Most of the gun violence occurs in our inner cities where families are broken. The 10 Commandments are the only gun control laws that ever worked.
Thank you, Mr. Purvis. Senator Barker.
Yes, I've worked on gun violence issues over several years in the Senate. And actually, for the last 5 years, I've carried the bill in the Senate that has been known as the Extreme Risk Protection Order Bill. Some people refer to it as the red flag law. What it would do is allow a police officer to go to or a Commonwealth attorney to go to a circuit court judge and ask to have the circuit court judge order temporary removal of a gun from someone who is an imminent risk to use that gun to either harm or kill himself or herself, or to harm or kill someone else. It's something that has now been adopted. When I first put it in, it had been adopted in 3 or 4 states. It's now up to about 15 states that it's been adopted in, and it's been shown to be highly effective. I also support background checks, universal background checks, to make sure that that everyone who is able to buy a gun is someone who should be able to buy a gun. where background checks have been implemented, they have been extraordinarily successful in keeping a number of people who were not eligible to buy a gun to be able to do that.
Thank you, Senator Barker. Senator Boysko.
Thank you so much for the question. I would like to thank Senator Barker for carrying the red flag law. We know actually the highest instance of gun violence is actually due to suicide. And the red flag law would be something that could help that. I've actually had 3 friends who committed suicide myself personally. These issues affect many people around the state. In fact, I hear more about concerns about gun violence prevention than just about anything else when I'm going door to door to talk to my constituents. I also support background checks, universal background checks, closing the gun show loophole, and giving local control to localities to make decisions for themselves. People are begging us to take action, and I believe it is incumbent on each legislator to do what's right for our communities and not for the NRA. And you can count on me to stand up for that.
Thank you, Senator Boysko. So, Senator Barker, we have a question about how Virginia can continue to safeguard the Medicaid expansion that was recently passed in the light of the federal government making noises as if they will not continue to support it.
Well, the Medicaid expansion is something I worked on extensively in the Senate. My background's in healthcare professionally. So I was certainly well prepared to deal with this issue and worked on it back in 2013 and 2014, came very close to getting it passed then. In 2018, we did get it passed. When it passed in 2018, I was the person who carried the bill in the Senate to do that, both for the Medicaid expansion and also for the funding mechanism. And just in case people don't know, there is not a single penny of state dollars, state general fund dollars that go to Medicaid expansion. It's all paid for by federal money and by monies that are contributed by the hospitals in Virginia who understand the value of making sure that people have access to care. We are making great progress in terms of implementation. We have over 300,000 people that have signed up, and things are moving forward very expeditiously. It's had provided tremendous benefit to lots of people, and I think that it's on safe ground for us to continue to move forward. There were attempts in the past session of the Congress to eliminate that. That's not going to happen now.
Thank you, Senator Barker. Senator Boysko.
Thank you so much. When I was in the House of Delegates, I was honored. I think it's probably the most important piece of legislation I will ever get to vote on to expand access to health care for 300,000 Virginians. I've actually gone down to Wise County to the clinic where people lined up for days in advance so that they could see a healthcare provider one time a year. And it's chilling. This is such an important issue for people. It's important for our businesses and our local hospitals, especially those in the rural areas, to make sure that they have the funding. Medicaid expansion was a very important and crucial thing for Virginia and for our economy, and I'm proud of it. And we've watched Congress try to repeal it dozens and dozens of times. I believe that because it is so popular with the population that we will have it for sure. Thank you.
Mr. Purvis, Medicaid expansion.
Medicaid does not deliver on its promises. While they are expanding Medicaid, I guess they ignored the issue that Virginia has 13,000 Medicaid waivers for disabled persons and has a waiting list of another 13,000, which they seem to have ignored. Medicaid cannot deliver on all of its promises. And here's what Medicaid expansion did. The people in poverty are still in poverty. The hospitals that charge outrageous prices are still able to charge outrageous prices. What they should have done was, first of all, increase people's income so they could afford health care by fixing the schools. The schools drive everything. And then they should have required providers to post their prices to reintroduce free market pressures and competition to force providers to be more efficient and reduce their costs. That is the way to truly fix healthcare.
Thank you, Mr. Purvis. Back to Senator Boysko. We have a question. Will you support the creation of an independent redistricting commission to draw the voting district lines in 2021 following the 2020 census, which we all hope everyone participates in? And, and how would you see that commission being constructed?
Yes, I served on the House of Delegates Privileges and Elections Committee prior to serving in the Senate, and independent redistricting is something that I very much support. Senator Barker has been a champion on that. He has carried that bill, and I was proud to support the constitutional amendment that we passed in this past year. We will be revisiting that again next year, and I look forward to being part of that. We shouldn't be drawing our own lines, and
well,
soon
there you go.
Soon we will do that.
Thank you, Senator Boysko. Mr. Purvis, independent redistricting.
So I'm really interested in this one because I am running in a district that was gerrymandered by my opponent 10 years ago. It stretches from Reston down to Arlington and has just a few connecting precincts in McLean, Falls Church, and Vienna. It votes 70% Democrat. So I like the. I get emails suggesting that it's only Republicans who do redistricting, gerrymandering. Well, the Democrats do it too. The right solution. The constitutional amendment is good. I support the commission. I don't think it's going to work. I think it's going to be deadlocked. I think the state Supreme Court is going to end up drawing districts. The right way to do districts is with a computer program that takes in the geographic constraints and population constraints and does something that everybody can see. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Purvis. Senator Barker.
Yes, as Senator Boysko referenced, I have been working on this issue for a number of years, and after several years of trying different approaches on it, this year was successful in getting a constitutional amendment passed in the Assembly. As Senator Boysko noted, it has to pass again next year to be able to become law, and then we'll go to the voters in November of 2020, where I'm confident it would pass and then would be implemented in 2021. The way we were able to put together a commission is to have 8 citizen members who will be picked by retired Circuit Court judges across the Commonwealth to fill slots, and then 8 legislators would include 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans to provide the legislative input into that process. For any plan to pass, you have to have 6 of the 8 legislators and 6 of the 8 citizen members to vote for it. And what that does is that protects everybody's interest so that nobody can be on the losing side in that process there. It will functionally end partisan gerrymandering and preferences that are provided and move things forward in a way that is equitable to all.
Thank you, Senator Barker. So I will start this next question with Mr. Purvis. Do you support or oppose the extension of the Mountain Valley Pipeline or the Transco Southeastern Trail Project? And what are your reasons for or against supporting the pipelines?
I don't know. I've seen I've seen arguments on both sides. I'm very suspicious of the emails I get from the folks who are opposed to the pipeline. What they want you to do is to not accept any campaign contributions from those organizations that want to build the pipeline. My opponent, by the way, has accepted $10,000 from Dominion Energy. And I think that's a little unfair because they're saying that you're allowed to accept contributions from us who have one side of the story, but you're not allowed to have contributions from those who want to build the pipeline, so we can't publish the other side of the story. I have not looked into both sides, though, to come to a conclusion although I lean towards completing the pipeline. I suspect that the environmental organizations have overstated their case.
Thank you, Mr. Purvis. Senator Barker.
Yes. Actually, the pipeline is something that we have not voted on in the legislature. It's not an issue that it comes before the legislature. It's an issue of regulation at both the federal and state level. There are state-level regulations through the Department of Environmental Quality and the Water Control Board and others there that impact this. There are a number of federal regulations that impact this. I'm waiting to sort of see what happens through that process because since we don't have a role in it to figure out sort of where we go in the future on these types of issues. I think we need to make sure that we have adequate energy supply. We need to make sure that we are protecting our environment. We need to make sure that we are not doing damage to individual landowners in the process, and, other than what's necessary. And I think that the better course is to let the regulations run their course. Clearly, there have been a lot of court decisions that have put some holds on things, or basically said you got to go back and redo different types of things. We'll see where it goes.
Thank you, Senator Barker. Senator Boyce, go.
Thank you so much. I have been endorsed by both the League of Conservation Voters and the Sierra Club, which are opposed to the pipeline themselves. The things that I'm concerned about are the personal property rights. If you talk to people who own the property where the pipeline is coming down, some of them have been very adversely impacted, and that concerns me quite a bit. The one thing that I think is really important is that we all are talking to one another. So it's not just the people who oppose the pipeline talking to themselves and the people who are supporting it talk to themselves. We've got to bring everybody together to make sure that we are making the best decisions under the same group of facts together. And it's imperative that we move towards a cleaner source of energy and renewables. I support the goals to get to 2050 carbon neutral in Virginia, and I was proud of the governor for making that statement. I will continue to listen to all sides and try to work collaboratively to help solve these problems together.
Thank you, Senator Boyce. Senator Barker, in the Commonwealth of Virginia for many years there has been assaults on abortion rights. Back and forth, we've had the courts involved, we've had trap legislation in a recent court decision. Some things were struck down, some things were upheld. The question is, do you support restrictions on abortion in Virginia, and what would they be?
I do not support unnecessary restrictions on abortion. And I think there have clearly been some issues, some proposals that have come forward. There have been some things that have been enacted through regulation, and at least one thing through legislation. Interestingly, in 2012, that was a major issue that we dealt with in the legislature in Richmond. There were 6 major bills that would have provided significant barriers to women in terms of being able to access their women's health issues, including abortion, but not limited to that. In the end, probably because of the public outcry, in effect, only 1/2 of one of those 6 proposals got enacted, and that was the ultrasound bill, which required an ultrasound. And interestingly, on that one, I was the one who knew that there was such a thing as a transvaginal ultrasound, and that it would not provide any information that would be useful in the first trimester. So to tell a woman who's 2 months pregnant, you have to have a transvaginal ultrasound, that's not a transvaginal ultrasound, is in effect providing a hurdle that will provide 0 information that's useful.
Thank you, Senator Barker. Senator Boyce.
I support a woman's right to make decisions for herself about when she's going to have a child, with whom, and at what time in her life. And I have a long history of activism around those issues. I am a former member of the board of directors of NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia, and I've carried legislation to repeal some of these burdensome regulatory measures that the General Assembly has already passed. We are going to be seeing in the court system at the federal level an attack on Roe v. Wade, and I think everybody needs to be paying attention to this very, very closely. Women and their doctors should be making decisions for themselves. You should not have politicians making those decisions for you. They have no idea what's going on in the lives of these families that they're affecting. This is really a serious issue for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Boyce. Mr. Purvis.
So a month before my wife died, we had Beach Week with our 2 children, spouses, and 7 grandchildren. And if you asked my wife if she were going to the beach, she said yes, and we're going to have so much fun. And that's how she said it. And she had a wonderful week at the beach a month before her passing, and the reason was the children. How did we ever get to the point where politicians thought they could win votes by snuffing out the lives of children? I thought we were supposed to love children. And there is a bill, perhaps these 2 support it, that says it tries to establish a right between giving birth to a child or aborting a child. How do you ever establish moral equivalence between the birth of a child and taking the life of a child? A mother's womb should be the safest place on earth, and the abortion advocates have made it a dangerous place.
Thank you very much. Okay. This is going to be a lightning round, 30 seconds for each of you. And we're going to start with Senator Boysko. On what issues do you foresee cooperation between the parties across the aisle this year, 2020?
Transportation. I believe that we've got to find a solution to find more funding for our local transportation dollars that we lost last year. I look forward to working with my colleagues to find those solutions.
Mr. Purvis, across the aisle.
Ending racial inequality in Virginia public schools. Who can be opposed to that? And I have the solution. What the establishment has done for the last 50 years does not work. It's a failure. It is ruining the lives of children, especially our most vulnerable children. It's wrecking our cities. I think everybody would want to end racial inequality in Virginia public schools.
Thank you, Mr. Purvis. Senator Barker.
I think we'll have tremendous cooperation across party lines on economic development. Virginia had a tremendous run of about 75 years where we outperformed the national economy and went from the bottom 10 in terms of economic standing to the top 10. That ended in October of 2013 when sequestration hit. We've suffered significantly since then. We are finally building back to where we are now growing as fast as the national economy again. And I see a commitment from both sides of the aisle to continue to move Virginia forward, to provide the jobs, to provide the good economy, to help strengthen the schools and do the other things that are necessary for us to achieve what we need to achieve for everybody.
Okay, so this brings us to our closing statements for each candidate. Mr. Purvis, you have the honors of doing the first closing statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Barker. You've been a big help to me here tonight. I appreciate that. And it's really been a pleasure for me to meet Senator Boysko and Senator Barker. The family, not the General Assembly, is the seat of government. The family depends on marriage, and having been married for 46 years, I can tell you marriage depends on fidelity, patience, forgiveness, unselfishness, characteristics which I learned are only developed through prayer. The alternative to big government is self-government of the type taught by Moses and Jesus Christ. If we want to solve the problems that we have talked tonight, we need to restore the ideal of the family. I am Arthur Purvis.
Thank you. Senator Barker.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to continue my campaign these last 3 weeks and hopefully ask for your vote on November 5th. I think we are poised for some tremendous growth in Virginia, for taking action that will continue to improve our standing and help citizens all across the Commonwealth. I look forward to working with whoever's elected out of these two to the Senate, as well as my colleagues across the Commonwealth from both the Republican and Democratic side. We need to continue to work together to do the best that we can for all Virginians and to make sure that we are delivering what we should and we're making the decisions for the right reasons.
Thank you, Senator Barker. Senator Boysko.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here with you all. I thank the League of Women Voters and for all the people who are watching at home. You know, I've been enjoying working across the aisle as well, as Senator Barker just said. When we work together, we can get things done. And for instance, we have invested $1 billion for our teachers and education system. We held the line on tuition raises this year, and we passed Medicaid expansion. We also have done some enormous economic opportunity, bringing in Amazon and some other big businesses. And I look forward to continuing that work next year. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. That concludes the Senate Candidate Forum. I'd like to thank our timers, Mary Valder and Bree Driscoll, and the screeners, Rona Ackerman and Taylor Kim. Thank all of you tonight for being here on Inside Scoop to hear from our candidates before you go to vote on November 5th or early. You can vote right now, and the deadline to register to vote is tomorrow. So if you haven't registered, you've got 24 hours to register. If you have registered, you can vote in person at your polling at any of the county locations. And if you haven't voted at all, you need to show up on November 5th, because what hangs in the balance is the future of Virginia. And that includes what we talked about here tonight, things like passing the ERA, things like supporting legislation for nonpartisan redistricting. It means having a voice in gun violence prevention here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So don't acquiesce and let someone else decide for you. Get out to the polls.